All right, so I apologize, but today I'm not able to be here. I have some paperwork to work on today, so I probably have a few subs today. Either way, we do need to get going on to our next topic because we've had quite a few snow days, and unfortunately that's put us a little bit behind with stuff. So today you're going to get your notes from me through this video. So to begin with, since we are taking notes, you will need your notebooks out. I'm going to have you turn to a clean page because we are going to start in on a new section of our chapter that we've been working on. So you guys just took a test from me last week and we discussed interior and exterior angles of polygons. Now we're going to go into parallelograms specifically. So what you're going to do is label this as parallelogram. Once I get my brush here. And parallelogram. Parallelogram vocab and rules. So we're going to go over parallelogram vocab and rules. That's what I want you to title your new page as. And today should be the, is it Wednesday? So 2/20/19. So parallelogram vocab rules. So our first one that I'm going to start off with is parallelogram. So we have parallelogram. And what this means is that we have a quadrilateral, and just as a quick review, a quadrilateral means that quad, so that means we have four sides. So this is something with four sides. If you need to put that into your notes, please do. So a parallelogram is a quadrilateral with parallel opposite sides. So a parallelogram is a quadrilateral, so it has four different sides with parallel opposite sides. So let's do a quick review here. So parallel means that you have two lines that are never going to touch. They're going to continue forever and ever and ever, and they're never going to touch each other. Kind of like the door frames that you can see around you, the window frames, those aren't going to touch. And they're also opposite sides. So if we're going to draw a parallelogram here, we have our parallelogram. It has four different sides. It's quadrilateral. Then what we have, if we label these as like A, B, C, and D, we can say that side A is parallel, or side AB is parallel to side DC. So I put these little purple arrows on here because that's going to show us that those two sides are parallel. Those are our little indicators or symbols that we use on our pictures to show that they are parallel. So we have AB. We remember back to how we write. So we have line segment AB and line segment DC are parallel. The symbol for parallel, so what's going to make the symbol for parallel, if you want to use it, is going to be this over here. These side-by-side kind of railroad track looking things. That means they're parallel. So you could say line segment AB is parallel to line segment DC, and that would also say the same thing. So we have AB and DC are parallel. They're opposite each other. They're on opposite sides. They're not adjacent, not right next to each other. We also have line segment AD is parallel to line segment BC. The reason why I put two little arrows on this is because it's our second set of sides. Kind of like we did with our angles when we said we had one arc in one area and then two arcs in another area. We can also say line segment AD is parallel to line segment BC. That's how I would write that shorthand there as well. All right, so moving on to our next word. We just went over parallelograms, the next thing we're going to talk about is the actual rules of parallelograms. So we talked about how we'd have parallelogram vocab and rules. So let me go over some of the rules parts to it. This is going to be helpful when we are actually going to start solving for specific angle measurements. All right, so our next thing, your first rule. So I'll put 2 here, but your first rule, you can write rule number 1 if you want to. You don't have to. Rule number 1. Opposite sides of parallelograms are congruent. Opposite sides of parallelograms are congruent. So we have our parallelogram. He's this little quadrilateral down here. We know that his sides opposite each other are going to be parallel. What we also know, some more little symbols that you can throw in here, is that these opposite sides, the opposite sides of our parallelogram, so across from each other, those are congruent. So you can put your little dashes on there if you want to say that those opposite sides of parallelograms are congruent. So if this side is 2 inches, that means this side down here also has to be 2 inches. If this side is y inches, that means this side has to be y inches as well. Our third rule here, so first we talked about our sides. Rule number 2, really our second rule. Rule number 2, this one is saying that opposite angles of parallelograms are congruent. So up here, we're talking about how we had our opposite sides of parallelograms are congruent. Well, now we can also say that the opposite angles of parallelograms are congruent. So if I draw my little picture down here, I'm going to scroll down here. If anyone needs these notes, they will be online so that you can look at them as well. If we draw a little quadrilateral parallelogram here, he's got 4 sides. What we can say here is that now that we know that opposite angles are congruent, if we have an angle over here, the opposite angle, so the angle right across from it down here, is going to be congruent to it as well. So we say that by having them both have 1 mark there. The other thing we can say is this little angle over here, I'm going to give him 2 marks because he's our second one, is congruent to the opposite one, the one across from it. Those ones are congruent as well. Our third rule here, so number 4, but rule number 3, is that consecutive angles in a parallelogram are supplementary. So now here's a little bit of a review. When we're talking about supplementary, this is normally when I was here, I would make you guys all look through your notes and tell me what supplementary means. Since I can't do that right now, I'm going to tell you. Supplementary means that they add up to how many degrees? Supplementary means they add up to 180 degrees. So consecutive angles are congruent. Or not congruent, supplementary, my bad. So if we had our little parallelogram down here, and we labeled him as A, B, C, and D, we could say that the measure of angle A, so if we're looking over here at our angle A plus our measure of angle B, our angle B down here, so B right here plus A here, those are going to equal 180 degrees. That would also go the same for measure of angle B plus, we want to say over here, measure of angle C. Those are also consecutive, so they are supplementary. They'll add up to 180 degrees. We can also say, let me color code this so that makes more sense for some of you. I'm going to slide down so that I can keep writing and you can see what I'm writing. What we can also say is that the measure of angle C plus the measure of angle D is equal to 180 degrees. So if we have our measure of angle C here in the pink plus the measure of angle D here in the blue, that's going to equal 180 as well. And then finally, we can also say the measure of angle D plus the measure of angle A is equal to 180 degrees. So I can label my angle D with blue, and then I'm running out of colors here. I'll choose yellow. Oh wait, no, it's back to red. The measure of angle A is equal to 180 degrees. So we've gone through 3 rules. I got one more for you here before we take a break. So with our 4th rule, which I'll label as number 5, rule number 4. If a parallelogram has one right angle, it has 4 right angles. It has 4 right angles. So if a parallelogram has one single right angle, it has 4. All 4 angles in it are also right angles. So let's look at this again. Right angle, for those of you that maybe need some help remembering, a right angle is 90 degrees. That's the thing where we mark it with like that little box in the corner that tells us that it's 90 degrees. So if we have a parallelogram, this time I'm going to make it look more boxy here. If we have one right angle up here, it means that all of these are right angles. And hey, looking at our rule number 2 and 3, this makes sense, right? Because if we say that our angle up here and our angle across from it are congruent, that means that this one's 90 over here. Then if we look at our rule number 3, where we had consecutive angles add up to 180 degrees, well, if they both add up to 180 degrees, that means that they're both 90. And then again, across from it is another 90-degree angle because they're congruent. So this is one that you can figure out with rule number 2 and 3, but if you want to remember rule number 4, this will be helpful as well. I lied to you. We actually have 2 more rules here. I know. I can hear you guys groaning right now. It's fine. It's fine. We just have 2 more rules, and then you guys will go on to your next thing. Okay, so number 6, we have a rule number 5. So rule number 5, this one is telling us the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. So the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. So what do I mean by this? If we have a parallelogram here, and I'm going to draw some diagonals in. So I'm going to underline my diagonals in red because that's what I'm showing. I have a diagonal here from one corner to the next corner, and then a diagonal here, corner to the next corner. So it's making an X in it. That's what it means by diagonals. And if I label this as like our A, B, C, D, and then I want to label my point here where they're crossing, we'll give it a Q. So what I can say here is that these diagonals, these lines that are creating the X of the parallelogram, they bisect each other. Let's think about the word bisect. So we have the entire word bisect, we have this little front, what do they call those? Root words or something? I don't remember. By. What does by mean? Yes, laugh, haha, we're talking about by. What does by mean? We can think about the word bicycle. How many wheels does bicycle have? 2. So bi means 2. You can also think of bisexual. Bisexual means 2. So what this means is that if they're bisecting each other, they're chopping each other into 2 different pieces. So then what we can say is that this part, this line segment AQ, is going to be congruent, that equal sign with the squiggly over it, congruent to QC, line segment QC. And just a quick review on what congruent means. Congruent means that they are equal, they're the same. So on the flip side, what we can also say is that line segment QD is congruent to line segment QB. So they bisect each other, they cut each other in half. And then our last part. This is one that I know I've talked to you guys about, whether or not it was directly speaking to you about it. I think this is 7 and rule number 6. Yes, I think so. So rule number 6. This is where we're going to say each diagonal of a parallelogram separates the parallelogram into 2 congruent triangles. So each diagonal of a parallelogram separates the parallelogram into 2 congruent triangles. So this is the one, if you had me for the last semester, you remember me talking about, or hopefully you do, when we have a piece of paper and we can find the area of this. We have length over here, we have width up here. If we want to find the area of this, we do just length times width, yes? This part that I'm writing down in red, you do not have to write down. So you do not have to write the stuff in red. However, if you'd like to, go for it. This gave us our area formula for a rectangle. But then I came in and I was like, oh my gosh, let's find the area of a triangle. So if we split this in half, if we separate with a diagonal this parallelogram, it turns into 2 congruent triangles. We have a congruent triangle here, and we have one here. What did we do with this parallelogram? Well, we separated it into 2 congruent triangles. We cut it in half, times our length times our width. So that's where we're talking about with that triangle formula. But what you really need to remember is this stuff that I've drawn here in the black, which would be the parallelogram, and then the diagonal, and then just remembering that you have 2 congruent triangles when those are split in half. All right, the next thing, you are going to also have a few notes to take as well. So this is where I'm going to have you guys, someone help pass out the half sheets of notes, and then somebody else pass out the glue sticks. You guys are going to glue these in onto new sheets of paper in your notebooks so that we can finish up those notes. All right, take a quick break by passing out notes, turning to a new sheet in your notebook, and gluing them into your notebook. I'll see you, or you'll hear me here in a few minutes.